So if you're watching this on YouTube, it was part of the Survival Podcast, episode 2706. It was a question I was answering in a variety show, and a link to the full episode, if you'd like to know more about what I do, is in the video notes below. With that, we'll go back to recording live on the podcast and YouTube. So this question came to me from Tactical Redneck, and it actually came on the blog for the Unloose the Goose podcast, for last week's Unloose the Goose podcast that you can find at unloosethegoose.com. And we were talking about loopholes in the law and getting around the system, and what I call status JiuJitsu. Status JiuJitsu is when you use the system against itself. You figure out a way to be able to do what you want to do, whether or not the state really wants you to do it or not. And this leads to a word that I've talked about a lot in this episode, or a concept I've talked about a lot in this episode, making a word that's a perfectly good word into something dirty and bad that you don't want to touch. Ew, it's nasty, that you're conditioned throughout your childhood in school and conditioned by the media constantly to, this is a bad word that you don't want to use. Because what we're talking in there is often referred to as a loophole in the law. And you often hear loopholes as this is a very bad thing. It's so rich people cannot pay taxes. Well, a loophole in the taxes is so that you, if you know what the hell you're doing, cannot pay as much taxes. Yeah, the rich people wrote it for themselves. That's absolutely abundantly clear that they did so. But as I teach and I've taught for a dozen years now, the tax code is huge. It's massive. Like it's 20 old style yellow pages for a major city stacked up on top of each other, right? It stacks them almost as tall as an adult man if you stand next to the tax code. But what's in that tax code? I say it's 10%. It's actually less, though. There's actually a very small portion of it that says, this is what you must pay. If you make money, there's like only a few different ways you can earn money that's considered taxable income. There's, income from labor, there's capital gains, there's dividends, there's a few other ways, real estate income, etc. But there's only a very small number of ways that income is classified. And so each type of income, you basically see how much of it there is, how much you make in total, and that gives you a rate, and that's how much you have to pay. How much tax code is really necessary for that? A few pages. It's a few pages in a chart. This is not why the code is huge. Everything else in the tax code is designed to tell you how to get out of doing what the little bit says you have to do. And we call those loopholes. And when the media teaches us about it, when school teaches us about it, it's all bad. It's all for the fat cats. It's not for you. It's for you too if you use it. So we were talking about things like this, and what Tactical Redneck asked is, can somebody please define exactly what a loophole is? What does a loophole mean? A loophole isn't really a thing. It's just a colloquialism. It's something we came up with to describe something that is, to give it a name, right? It's what it really comes down to. And then it was vilified and made bad. But the way I can explain a loophole is to explain something that people do not consider a loophole. They don't consider a loophole at all. They just consider it following the law. But it's a loophole, and when I get to the end, you'll understand why. So how about owning a suppressor? For those that aren't familiar with the term suppressor, because somebody shared this with you or whatever, a silencer for a gun. I can own a silencer for a gun completely legally. Now, if I just go out and buy one and I have it in my possession, it is a federal felony. They will send me to a place I don't want to go to that we call Club Fed, which is a federal prison. I will have a felony on my record. It will ruin my life even after I get out. It will take away and strip rights from me for the rest of my existence. I will forever be a felon. If I try to get a job, I'll have to answer a question with, have you ever been convicted with a felony? As yes. But most people are aware, and if you're not, there's a thing called a tax stamp you can buy. It's like $200. You fill out some paperwork. It's an invasive background check. It's kind of like getting a metaphorical proctology exam. To make sure that you're not a bad person that can somehow go destroy the world with your little tube with some stuff in it that makes the sound of a gun less. That's all it really is. But again, that little tube, if they can prove it really is a suppressor, or you've affixed it to a weapon so that it can suppress, is a federal felony. But you fill out this little magic piece of paperwork. You give them 200 of your Federal Reserve note space credits, and you wait somewhere between 6 months to a year, and they'll send you back a thing that says you can now buy your suppressor. And I can go buy a suppressor. Now, most people would say, well, that's not a loophole. Isn't it? Really? Because understanding this is how you understand how all of the loopholes work. It's just a better understanding of the law and taking the steps necessary to comply with the law so that I can do something that you can't. So now let's imagine I have a friend named Fred. I'm standing there with my suppressor in my hand. And a cop walks by and he goes, "Hey, that's a suppressor." "Yeah, it is. Go screw. It's my suppressor. None of your business." And he wants to push it. So I pull out my magic piece of paper and say, "This is my magic piece of paper. Here's my suppressor. Go piss off." Now, I don't treat police officers that way. I'm just saying that I could. Now, he might find some other reason to harass me, but there's literally nothing you can do now. I can be at the same range, cop sitting next to me, firing with a suppressor. "Hey, do you have it?" "Yeah, here's my magic piece of paper. Fuck off." All right? I mean, that's legitimately, that's where this goes. I can do this now. Fred, sitting right next to me, does not have his magic piece of paper. Maybe Fred's a nicer guy than me. Maybe Fred didn't even know that he wasn't allowed to have this little tube that screws onto the end of his gun. That same cop can arrest him and convict him of a felony. I can do something he can't right next to him because I've structured the way that I'm doing it differently. That's a loophole. That's all that it means. It means that you've understood the restrictions around you enough that you are able to do something that other people can't do or do not believe that they can. Here's a more colored version of it, a little bit harder to understand. And I'm not going to get too specific because I may not remember exactly, but one of our guys in the Goose Gaggle, John Bush, sells Kratom. And he was doing something somewhere where they were giving away like a shot of Kratom for people to try when they were doing other business. And law enforcement in Austin area came in and said, "Hey, that's food and beverage. You're giving people a drink. You don't have a license to sell food and beverage here." And I don't remember the total story behind it, but basically they put it in a sealed jar and then gave it as a sample. And that made it no longer food and beverage in the way that you would enforce the law. Like when you go to Starbucks and they have to have depending on city, county tax situations or whatever, they had, you buy a coffee from Starbucks, they have to be a restaurant or have some license or whatever it was. Well, all of a sudden they didn't have to have it anymore. Just by putting it into a jar. Now that was done by John reading and understanding the law and what the law said. And when they came back to harass them, he pointed it out and they left him alone. Now, there's no guarantee you'll be left alone. And this is why when you're playing with what we refer to as loopholes, you better, one, know what you're doing, and two, assess your risk. So if you think you found another loophole to owning a suppressor, you probably have not. It does not involve having that stamp, and you think I'll be able to get away with this, and an officer arrests you. And then you pull out your loophole card when you get to in front of a judge, and the judge says, "You're wrong." What happens now? You're going to Club Fed. Well, what happens if you do the loophole thing with like the food and beverage? You're probably getting a fine for a few $100s. Now, you might want to know what the actual consequences are. And a fine that I get that's like, I tried, might mean you can't feed your kids for the last week of the month. So you have to judge that too. But that's all a loophole is sufficiently understanding something to the point where you're able to do it where others either don't think they can or are not able to. And to do it in a way where your ass is covered. Here's kind of another way where I really never needed to use a loophole, but I needed to use strategy so I didn't deal with a cop doing all that she could to ruin my life. Even on that day. So one day, it was long ago, I'm outside in my backyard and I have a little trap and I'm shooting a pellet gun. I had a neighbor that was a Karen. We didn't call them Karens back then. This was a long time ago. But today you'd call her a Karen. So she called the police and said she was in grave fear for her safety and her children's safety, that this gun was going to kill somebody. This was a pellet gun being fired into a pellet trap, not in her direction, by the way. No way this could cause her any grief whatsoever. This lady cop comes and she starts telling me that it's illegal for me to discharge a pellet gun in the city of Arlington, Texas, which I know is not true. But I don't 100% know that it's not true. I'm not sure. All she wants me to do is say, I'll stop. What I want to say is, go screw yourself. I'm not stopping. It's not illegal. If you want to cite me for it, cite me for it. Well, this could open up a whole can of worms I'm not comfortable with today, so I just agree. Okay, Officer Karen, I will not fire my gun anymore today. So then the next thing I did was call the non-emergency number for the Arlington Police Department. This was Mansfield Police Department. And said, can I speak to the chief of police? And they said, no, you may not. And I said, well, I have a very important question here. And Officer Karen, I couldn't remember really if I wanted to, but gave her full name and her badge number, which I took down. She was fine with giving it to me. Was just at my home, and she told me something, and I would like to verify it. Can I speak to someone that's in her chain of command? They actually put me in touch with an assistant chief that was her boss's boss. Great. That's what I wanted. And all I said is, here's the situation. This is what I was doing. This is the safety precautions I was taking of. She told me that a pellet gun is classified as a firearm in the city of Mansfield. I don't believe that's true, is it? And he said, well, absolutely not, it's not true. I said, is there anything that legally prevents me from discharging a pellet gun in my backyard the way that I was doing it, as long as that's what I was actually doing? He said, no. I said, great, let me get your name and your badge number. And what officer is between you and Officer Karen? And he gave me that. He was very nice. And then the next day I went out and I had my pellet gun and I was shooting into my thing, and guess who came back? Officer Karen, who said, I thought we discussed this and I wasn't going to have to do this again. It's a funny thing about that, Officer Karen. I called your police department and I spoke to Assistant Chief so-and-so. Do you know who he is? She got like a little bit smaller and a little less cocky and said, yes, I know who he is. And he told me that you report to Sergeant so-and-so. Is that? Yeah, I work for him. Well, he was supposed to let Sergeant so-and-so know this, and I don't know if he got the chance to let you know that. Yeah, but what you told me is incorrect. It is completely legal for me to discharge this pellet gun in the manner in which I'm doing it. You may go tell my neighbor that, or you may just leave her to be upset about it. But I was told by Assistant Chief so-and-so that you work for that there's nothing illegal about what I'm doing. And she just kind of sat there and looked at me defeated. And I said, and ma'am, if I may, I kind of think that when you told me that a pellet gun was classified as a firearm in the city of Mansfield, you knew that was wrong. And you just didn't want me to do this, and you thought your life would be easier if I didn't do it. But I wanted to be sure, so I contacted your police department, and I asked them if what I was doing was illegal, and they told me it wasn't. So at this point, if you still feel that it's illegal, I have written down everybody's name, I've documented the conversation, and I am happy to allow you to issue me a citation, and I'll show up in court, and we can tell a judge that you say it's illegal and I say it's not, and we can have, so if you'd like to cite me for this, you may do so now. And she just said, look, could you do me a favor and please just not do this anymore? And I said, I'm sorry, no. Why would I do you that favor? What do I owe you? And I'm not being mean, but why do I owe you that? Well, it's good to get along with your neighbors. I don't talk to this neighbor. I don't really know her. I don't really want to. The fact she did that, like, she's the one generating your issue now. Why don't you go speak to her and explain to her I'm not violating the law? Is there anything else I can do to help you? Well, sir, no, except door closed. I'm not going to be mean. I'm not going to be rude, but if there's nothing else I can do to help you, I didn't ask you to come here. Goodbye. That's not actually a loophole, but that's understanding the law, and that's all a loophole is. There really is no such thing as a loophole. It's really not a loophole. It's a made-up name that's been bastardized so that you won't do what you have every right to do. Stand up for your rights under the law and say, there's nothing that actually says I can't do this. Or, in order to do this, these are the things I'm required to comply with. The other example I gave on that episode was we wanted to sell raw milk in West Virginia. Almost impossible to do. You can't even sell it for pet food. It's impossible. They will arrest you if you say, I'm selling this raw milk for Fido. Because they know it's a loophole. All right? It's a loophole, and they closed that loophole. And they said you can't sell raw milk for pet food in the state of West Virginia. I can't sell raw milk to my neighbor in West Virginia for their dog to drink. And I can't have a cow share. That's where I take care of your cow, and you and 5 other people own it, and I take care of it, I milk it, and every week you come get your share of milk from your cow. That's another loophole that has been used. So West Virginia closed that loophole. So we sold raw milk for use as a soil amendment. And we put on the label, it is a violation of West Virginia law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with its labeling. So raw milk is actually a great soil amendment, and there's nothing in West Virginia law that says you cannot sell milk as a soil amendment. So we did. And if Bill bought it and decided to drink a soil amendment, not my fault, not my liability, and I never told Bill he could drink it. I might have told Bill that we milked the cow, and to make sure your soil amendment is as fresh as possible, we immediately refrigerate it at a temperature of XYZ. That's a loophole. But it's not a loophole. It's just a word we made up. And we made sound bad so that you won't do what you have every right to do, and you will see it as something only bad people do, i.e. rich people, and they will do it, and they will make their lives better with it, and you will sit and not act. That's all a loophole is. So remember, this is in episode 2706 of the Survival Podcast, link in the video notes below.